But right now, it's this.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
The Geek Show.
The Geek Show joining us, Ms. Behaviour, in fact, from The Geek Show today. Hello, Ms. B.
Good morning, Wammo.
Good morning. And today we're talking about something called Quirk theory, or how geeks will inherit the earth.
Absolutely. This is a great story. It's a new book by an author called Alexandra Robbins, who's written a couple of previous books about one called Pledged and one called Overachievers, studying social behaviour in the context of academia. So her new book, which is called The Geek Shall Inherit the Earth, Popularity, Quirk Theory and Why Outsiders Thrive After High School. And this is a great book. She's gone back to high school and studied 7 individuals, 6 of them who come from the typical unpopular cliques, as it were, if there's such a thing, and 1 popular girl. So you've got the classic loner school types. You've got the loner, the popular bitch, which is the cheerleader. You've got the nerd, the new girl, the gamer, the weird girl, and the band geek. Now,
all the cliches.
I've been more than one of those when I was at school, because I was so not cool at school. And they've studied all these different, these different types and looked at whether or not popular kids go on to be successful. And surprisingly enough, they don't. It's the loners and the outsiders and the misfits and the weird kids who are actually doing better these days. Huh. So she's looked at all these different types and has come up with the conclusion that social exclusion as a teenager can be one of the best indicators of future success. Now, this is because schools are becoming increasingly conformist. You know, we're trying to drill kids, put them through these different grades, turn them all out the same, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because the traits that she's researched, which are most valuable in adults, are as follows: creativity, originality, free thinking, vision, resilience, authenticity, self-awareness, integrity, candor, curiosity, love of learning, and courage. All things which aren't necessarily the sort of things you get to display if you're in the popular cliques at school. So she's gone on to look at some other people, such as, for example, J.K. Rowling, a very famous author for Harry Potter, who described herself as a squat, bespectacled child who lived mostly in books and daydreams, and who was bullied at school because she was different. And just like what she's gone on to do. And also, when you look at her characters in Harry Potter, they're all kind of outcasts and misfits, but they're quite happy to be so.
Yeah.
So basically, she says that nothing is more unnerving to the truly conventional than the unashamed misfit, which I think is fantastic, because I was very much a misfit as a child. I mean, were you cool at school?
I don't know if I could say that I was. But this actually does make a little bit of sense, though, doesn't it? Because those who conform and stay with the status quo are only going to carry on the creativity and innovation that has always been. But if you're sort of on the outside, a little bit strange, and you're thinking on a different level, then you are going to make real change later on.
Absolutely. And you also have a different perspective on things. If you're not so busy trying to be like everybody else, you actually have time to form your own personality and your own identity. So she goes on to say that it's also the fact that popular students are more likely to be involved in aggression, whether it's by them or to them. There's also the less likely to do well in school. They're more likely to feel pressure to conform and to engage in risky behaviour because they egg each other on. So her advice to parents is don't worry about encouraging your children to be popular, because popularity isn't an indicator of whether you're liked or not. It's just an indicator of whether you're prepared to fit in to the rigid social structures that are deemed to be acceptable to be popular. But she does encourage parents to let their children go to lots of after-school clubs, so that they can meet other people with similar tastes and interests. And I think that's really good advice. We should be worrying less about popularity and more about forming people as individuals. So there's another book which kind of highlights the similarities here, called Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, which was written a few years ago. And he had a look at the success stories and what underpinned various people for their achievements. And he calls an outlier a person who doesn't fit into our normal understanding of achievement. So these are people who've gone off and forged their own paths and done their own thing. For example, Bill Gates, who's completely, changed the world in his own way. And there's three key factors that Gladwell thinks contributes to success. One of them is accumulated advantage. So, for example, Bill Gates has done so well because he was fortunate enough to be exposed to computers at a young age and be in the environment that he was able to continue his learning and his growth. They also looked at hockey players. Why are championship hockey players in Canada more likely to be born in January than December? And it's obvious when you think about it that the ones born in January are a year older than the kids born December the 31st. So they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster. So this accumulated advantage early on compounds over time. So again, advice to parents, give your children, if you can, as much opportunity to try as many things as they can when they're young. Because if they spark with something, I was very like this. I had my first computer when I was 8 years old, a BBC Basic Micro, tinkering around with it, keying in software, playing in games from, those old-fashioned tape decks. You used to put a tape in.
Yeah.
Or even buying magazines from the newsagents and hand typing in software.
Yeah.
I was doing that at 8 years old. So obviously that's given me a huge advantage.
I must have been
on.
a late bloomer compared, because I think I was 10, so I was 2 years.
Oh, that's old school. But the other thing he's found is that it's a lot about attitude over aptitude. And this is the other thing. People think that successful people are born with all these talents. But the one thing that he noticed from all of these wildly successful people, whether they were from music, whether in IT, whether they were writers, whatever, was what he calls the 10,000 hour rule, which is pretty much if you're prepared to put more than 10,000 hours into practicing something, you're going to master it and be really successful. So no big, surprises there. It's about giving yourself early advantages if possible, practicing and working hard at it, and trying to get those accumulated advantages early on. So, I think that's good advice. And then, of course, you've got, looking at these outliers and nerds and misfits, I thought it would be fun to have a look at some celebrity nerds.
Yeah.
Because there's a few people you not necessarily realise are geeky. So we've got basically Rosario Dawson, who was with in Sin City. She played Gail in Sin City. Fantastic comic book adaptation. She's actually produced a series called Occult Crimes Task Force with herself as the lead character, which I think is just awesome. You've got Felicia Day, who was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She was also in Dollhouse. She's a huge World of Warcraft gamer and has actually written her own series. It's a web series, which I think you can also watch through the Xbox. I've seen a few clips on it through there.
Yeah, I've done that.
And it's called The Guild. So it's basically, she's written it, she stars in it, she produces it, and it's a short series of episodes, so that they're only about 3 minutes long, about her guild with World of Warcraft gamers.
Yeah, it really
it's
is.
Really funny.
Geek humour at its finest. Yeah.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And my favourite geek of all, I must say, I'm such a fan, is Vin Diesel. Vin Diesel is the biggest Dungeons and Dragons nerd you can imagine. When he was in he grew up in New York. He grew up around lots of artists. His father ran a rep company in theatre, and I think so. He actually grew up around lots of creative people. But he spent most of his teens and his 20s playing Dungeons and Dragons, and I absolutely love the stories about when he was a bouncer, so he actually got his break by writing, producing his own film, a $3,000 low-budget movie, which is kind of cool. But he said when he was bouncing and he was getting into the early days of Hollywood, when he'd go home at night, he'd be playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is just awesome. So there's quite a lot of people out there who you might not necessarily think are as geeky as they really are. But I think the message to take is it's okay not to be cool at school. It is actually a huge advantage if you're not one of the popular kids, and you just stick to what you love, practice for 10,000 hours, and you'll be a master of it and happy and successful, hopefully.
And the message, I suppose, and there's actually a great Google advertising campaign at the moment, specifically slanted towards the gay community, but other communities are also taking ownership of it as well. Anyone who feels a little bit marginalised as a kid or as a teenager, I think it's called It Gets Better. It's worth doing a search on YouTube, and there's some fantastic videos. It does. Yeah.
Absolutely. So own your quirks, be proud about it. Don't be afraid to be a misfit and an outlier, because you might well be the next Bill Gates.
Indeed. Thanks very much, Ms. B.
Cheers, Wammo.
Misbehaviour over there at thegeekshow.com. 2 3s rather than 2 E's, and you'll be able to find that once again as a video as well.